Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I'll be your first speaker, but I'm also your MC. My name is Shane Meikle. First things first, the bathrooms are to the south of the building, and the emergency exits are at the back and to the sides. I would ask that you turn your cell phones off, or not off, but silent, because it's very distracting, and I'm usually the biggest culprit of that. So, but I did make sure I turned mine to silence. There will be questions and answers at the end. Please save your questions till we get to the question and answer period. Now I'm going to talk about a little bit about the historical relationship between Ottawa and what is now the province of Alberta. From 1880 to 1903, 1904, there was a huge settler movement from the United States up here. And this worried Ottawa. How many people here have heard of the little spot on the map called USONA? You don't count, Max. There's one there. I actually live 6 miles from USONA. And during the 1880s to about 1920, it had a population of over 500 people. Now it has a population of 4 people and a dog. Now, do you know what USONA stands for? The United States of North America. How many people here know the town of Rimbey? Okay, there's a lot more. Its original name was Kansas Ridge. The city of Airdrie, its original name was Yankee Valley. I live about halfway between USONA and another community called Dakota. All over Alberta and Saskatchewan, there were towns popping up in communities that either still have the American names or had American names and they've changed them out. And this is one of the main reasons why Ottawa wanted to make the Northwest Territories into provinces, because it was a lot easier to absorb a territory than it is to absorb a province. So that is one of the big factors in why Saskatchewan and Alberta were formed out of the Northwest Territories. In 1903, Sir Clifford Sifton made the following quote: "We desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people to the east, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way to our prosperity." Now, why is it significant that I mentioned Sir Clifford Sifton? Well, the big reason is he was one of the main architects of the Alberta and Saskatchewan Acts. So in 1905, on September 1st, the Alberta Act and the Saskatchewan Act came into being, forming 2 provinces out of the Northwest Territories. Now, at the time when they came out with the Alberta Act, how many here have actually read the Alberta Act? I would encourage you to go to the Government of Alberta's website and download a copy. It's not very long, but it will give you a totally different perspective on how we started. And one of the big things was that they gave us the name of a province, but they gave us the rights at that time of the same as the territories. We did not get full provincial rights. In fact, our first 2 premiers were appointed by Ottawa, not elected by the people. So I would encourage you to go read the Alberta Act and see how we've had to fight ever since to get back the rights, or to get the rights that they're afforded to every other province. Alberta and Saskatchewan are the only 2 provinces that were brought into Confederation by an act of legislation rather than by negotiation. Every other province negotiated their way into Confederation. In 1913, the federal government came up with the Railroad Act amendments. Now, what did this do? This took and made it so that regional railroads could not cross provincial lines. And so what did that mean? So that meant, if let's say I loaded grain in Stettler and I was shipping it to Thunder Bay. When I hit the Saskatchewan border, I would have to switch, but I'd not just switch engines. They'd have to unload the grain and load it onto the other carriers' cars. So you'd have to do that in Saskatchewan. You'd have to do it at Manitoba and then again in Ontario. And this made it very difficult for regional railways to survive. And by 1939, the majority of them had shut it up. The largest one being Alberta Central Railway. Alberta Northern Railway, which ran in this area, it survived in name until 1972. But they were purchased in the 50s by CN Rail. And that in 1943, a new company was formed, CN, and they bought up all the assets of the regional railway. But interestingly enough, the Railroad Act amendments was given an exemption in the East. So it only applied to Western railways. In 1930, the National Natural Resources Transfer Agreement was passed, and that gave the provinces control over their natural resources. However, at the time, the federal government made it very clear that this did not apply to Alberta and Saskatchewan. So even though by law it did, they made it very clear that they weren't going to hold it us to the same standard as the other provinces. In 1931, on December 11th, the Statute of Westminster was decreed by the King. Now, what did that do? Because there's a lot of misconception about the Statute of Westminster, but the one thing that it did do is give sovereignty over land and resources to the people in care of the provinces, not in care of Ottawa, in care of the provinces. I'm going to pull this up because it's slowly sagging. Now, that means that there is not a drop of federal land in this province. If we were to enforce the Statute of Westminster, we would never have things like Jasper happen. National parks do not exist. They are owned by the province, and we need to enforce that because we were given all the land within our borders by the Crown in 1931. In 1935, the Canada Wheat Board was formed, and it was voluntary. Anybody could join the Wheat Board. But in 1943, it was made mandatory for all Western Canadians. So if you were a farmer and you wanted to ship your grain, and you lived in Ontario, you wanted to ship it to the States, you would pull up to your grain bin, load your load of grain, and turn around and drive to the States and sell it. If you lived in Winnipeg or Saskatoon area or Cold Lake area, you wanted to sell your grain, you would pull up to the elevator, or you'd pull up to your grain bin, load your grain into your truck, you would pull over to the elevator, offload it on the one side, go around to the other side of the elevator, buy it back from the Canada Wheat Board for they would make a profit on it, and then you could take and ship it to the States. Now, this ended in 2012, and the reason that it ended is finally Western Canadian farmers had enough. And they stood up, and 13 Saskatchewan and Alberta farmers in particular decided that it was worth going to jail for it. And they ran the border with their grain, and they spent from 6 months to a year in jail each. And finally, it was repealed in 2012. From 1947 to 1950, federal control of oil pricing and pipelines. We had just discovered oil in in Alberta. And of course, the federal government wanted it. So they set our oil pricing, and they told us when we could put pipe in the ground to get it from point A to point B. And that lasted for 3 years before it was finally repealed. How many in this room are old enough to remember the great flag debate of 1965? Got a few in the room. Now, I started school in the early 70s, and by that time, it had already been memory hold. But what happened was that Lester B. Pearson, then Prime Minister of Canada, decided that he wanted a new flag for Canada. And he decided that he wanted it to be the sugar maple leaf. Diefenbaker stood up in the House of Commons and said that it needed to be the Manitoba maple or box elder, which was found from coast to coast, since the sugar maple is only found in eastern Canada, not in western Canada. Pearson did not like this, so he forced closure on the bill and forced it to vote. And not a single Western Canadian MP voted for the maple leaf flag. And there was so much contention around it that in 1967, when Canada celebrated its centennial, many towns and cities in Western Canada refused to fly the maple leaf. They flew the red ensign, which are still an official flag of Canada. They would not fly the maple leaf. But by the early 1970s, only a few years later, nobody remembered it. And I think it had something to do with a hockey game in '72 between Canada and Russia. And they used that as a way to jam that flag down Western Canadians' throats. From 1973 to 1974, there was the oil export taxation policies, and Alberta's oil profits were capped. This meant that you probably heard that in the 70s we had an energy shortage. Well, no, we didn't have an energy shortage. If you were an oil company and if you surpassed your quota, you had to send all your profits to Ottawa. Would you even bother pulling it out of the ground? And that's what happened. And that lasted for 18 months. And finally, under our then premier, my brain just evaporated. Our premier at the time fought against it and was able to get him to repeal it after 18 months. And that was a big thing. But they weren't done with us. Because in 1980, the National Energy Program was brought in. Now, the National Energy Program brought everything that was in that previous bills back into play, but it added to it that we now had to sell to the East at their desired price. We could not set the price that we sold to Eastern Canada. And we had to give them priority on our oil. And this stayed in effect until 1988. Then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney turned around and repealed it in 1988. But he didn't repeal it because he was so magnanimous towards the West in Alberta. He repealed it because oil prices had dropped so low that it cost more to maintain the program than they were getting out of it. So anybody that tells you that it matters whether it's a liberal government or a conservative government, it doesn't. Alberta doesn't matter to them. In the 1980s and 90s, we had several significant things happen. We had the 1982 Constitution Act, which brought home the Constitution to Canada. 1985, we had the first Quebec referendum. In 1995, we had the second referendum. Now, the second referendum brought us a little-known thing called the Clarity Act. And that is something that we can thank Quebec for, because what that did is it gave, when they had finished their referendum, the federal government went to the Supreme Court and said, can a province leave Canada? And the Supreme Court came back with a list of steps that they would have to take in order to, that a province would have to take in order to leave the Federation. And the federal government put those into law under the Clarity Act. And that is what we are following at this point in time, is the Clarity Act and following the steps in that. Let's move forward to 2012. Bill C-38 was brought in, which was the Jobs, Growth and Prosperity Act. And it gave Ottawa complete control over Alberta's projects. So this meant that it didn't matter if we wanted to put in a highway, a skyscraper, a pipeline, anything major projects required federal approval in order to do. In 2016, they brought in federal carbon price, which, as we all know, really hurt our oil patch. And we haven't recovered yet from it entirely. In 2019, Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Act, and Bill C-48, the Tanker Ban Act, were brought in. Now, what they did is they controlled where we could put the pipeline in, how we could put it in. We had to get even more federal control over it because now they were bringing in environmental and blah, blah, blah to bring it into effect. And then we would no longer allowed to ship it off the West Coast, ship our oil off the West Coast. Now, these four, last fall, Premier Smith signed an MOU with the Prime Minister that would have got rid of these four things. But within a week of that MOU being signed, Parliament met and the House of Commons voted to defeat that. So that MOU is still is null and void, and all of these are still in effect. Now let's move to modern day. You've got two bills that are in the House right now. One of them is on its first reading in the House, and the other one is on its first reading in the Senate. Bill C-9, which is the one that's on its first reading in the Senate, has already passed the House of Commons. And what that bill is it's the anti-hatred bill. And what that says is that if somebody complains against you or me, against a meeting like this, we can be charged, we can be thrown in jail, and we can lose all of our assets. Now, the one that is in the first reading is Bill C-8, and that's the online hate bill, the online censorship bill. And that was, when put into conjunction with Bill C-9, is even more erroneous, because what that does is they can wipe you off the internet with the stroke of the minister's pen. And I don't mean that they'll get rid of your ISP. They will get rid of your presence on the internet. And if you try and make a fake profile to get around it, and they find out, you can go to jail for it. And that, like I said, takes only the stroke of a pen of the minister. There is no recourse for you. You have no appeal process. There is nothing that you can do if they do it. You are done. And how many people here could survive without some access to the internet? And in case you're thinking, how many of you use your ATM machine? That's via the internet. You will be wiped your presence off the internet. So that includes ATMs. That includes anything of that nature. You will have no access. Now, these two bills, if I took the rest of the history out, just these last two bills are reason, in my opinion, that we need to seek sovereignty for the Alberta. Thank you very much. And our next speaker is going to be Mr. Leighton Gray. And Leighton is a constitutional lawyer, and he's a very knowledgeable guy, I'll tell you that, because I've heard him speak many times, and I learn something new every time I hear him speak. So without further ado, here's Mr. Leighton Gray.
Good evening. It's great to see you all here. I know it's a beautiful spring night. It's been a long winter. Those of us who are residents of Cold Lake know it's been a long winter. And so I'm not surprised that people are out enjoying that weather. But for those of you who are here in person and watching on the interweb, I'm going to try and maybe expand upon some of the things that Shane was saying. You know, recently in Red Deer, last week, in fact, our Premier, Danielle Smith, was speaking in Red Deer. And she said something a little bit strange, and I'm going to share it with you, and maybe it might tickle your brain a little bit. She said, she was asked about Alberta independence. And she said, well, you know, we don't really need a divorce. We just need counseling. And, you know, as you heard, I'm a lawyer. I used to do divorce law, family law, until I wised up a little bit and got out of that. But that got me thinking, well, okay, counseling sounds good, right? Right? We want to preserve marriages. But what if your spouse is a psychopath? Like, what if your spouse is like Hannibal Lecter? What if he wants to kill you and eat your liver with some farmer beans and a nice Chianti? Counseling's not going to work. So I believe, and I'm going to explain to you tonight why counseling isn't going to work, and why our current political leadership, including Danielle Smith, for all her many merits and talents and things that she does for us, is not going to lead us to any place good for Alberta. All the things that Shane talked about that have been Alberta's situation since time immemorial are just going to continue unless we change the picture. And by the way, the picture that we have of our lives right now is changing. The ground is moving. You're all sitting, but the ground is moving beneath your feet. And I'm going to explain to you how that's working. You've probably been hearing our esteemed Prime Minister, our estimable Prime Minister, Mark Carney, the installed one, talking about something we call the New World Order. In fact, every time you hear him speak, he talks about the New World Order. What have you noticed about the New World Order? What's missing? He never tells you what in heaven it is. So, big reveal. I'm going to tell you, because listen, this information is out there. You can go and find it for yourselves. I've done the homework. Now I'm going to share it with you. Okay? Here's what it is. I want to speak to you tonight about something that's really profound and urgent. It's called the rise of Homo Deus. You know what that is? It's Latin. It means human God. And there's a man named Yuval Harari. I hesitate to call him a man. He's more of a cretin. But he is one of the big guys at the World Economic Forum. In fact, he's their main intellectual. And he wrote a book called Homo Deus, which sold about 45 million copies. It's not as many as the Bible, but it's a lot of books, a lot more than I've sold. So if you want to help me out, the table's over there tonight, $20. Shameless plug. So, but this Homo Deus is not a distant sci-fi fantasy. I'm going to explain to you why. It's actually the engineered future being imposed on us right now. So what we're witnessing, what I'm saying to you is that this is not a random policy failure like the ones that Shane was talking about, but those bills he was describing, that's the implementation of the New World Order. And this is not political incompetence. This is not fumbling around in the dark like Justin Trudeau. This is a coordinated multi-act drama aimed at reshaping humanity itself, changing everything we know, everything we love. So, and this is going to come in 4 acts. Has anybody been to a live stage play? Okay, well, if you know your Shakespeare, usually it's 4 acts, right? So here we go. There's Act 1. Act 1 is called The Illusion of Scarcity. You know about this? Okay. The problem is not a lot of resources. Okay. There's enough money, there's enough food, there's enough water. Sure, there's enough land, and in Alberta, there's enough energy for all of humanity to thrive. Agreed? Okay. The true crisis is that we have handed over control of these resources to psychopaths. Okay. You know what a psychopath is? Okay. Well, I'll explain to you. This is the legal meaning. The psychopath is not insane. Psychopath is in full control of their mental capacities. What a psychopath is a person who would have the same emotional response to killing you as they would to swatting a fly. That's a psychopath. And these are the people running our country. That's who's in control. That's why your life feels so uncertain. That's why it feels scary. That's why you don't feel like you can plan for the future. That's why you feel like your kids and grandchildren, this place isn't going to be here for them anymore. That's why. It's the illusion of scarcity. Okay. So who's doing it? Well, it's these elites who prioritize power over people. And in Canada and across the West, we see this in various forms. There's record immigration targets pushed without any parliamentary debates. Do you vote for mass immigration? Raise your hand if you did. Probably not. Did you know it's never worked out? All the way back, the Roman Empire went down because of mass immigration. And it's all there in history. And they're using this. Strained housing, which is connected to mass immigration, healthcare, and social cohesion, right? The isolation, not knowing our neighbors, right? And we see it in the deliberate sabotage of our energy infrastructure. Policies that hobble reliable resources while promising green utopias that never materialize and just make people, the so-called elites, very, very rich. So this isn't just mismanagement. This isn't just buffoonery. It's managed decline. What's the goal? What's the goal? To make us dependent, immobile, and poor. Why? So that we're ripe for control. That's Act 1. If you feel like we're already at the end of Act 1, it's because we are. Okay. So let's talk about Act 2. Act 2 is the erosion of sovereignty and the transnational machine. Let me explain about this. So this Liberal Party, they call themselves Liberal Party. But those of you old enough to remember, this is not the Liberal Party that you know. This is not the Liberal Party of Paul Martin. This is not even the Liberal Party of Jean Chrétien. In fact, if you remember back to the early 90s, it pains me to say this, just my arm here. Jean Chrétien was actually not a bad prime minister, certainly in comparison to Justin Trudeau or Mark Carney. And in fact, Paul Martin, who eventually became our prime minister, was one of the best financial ministers that we ever had. And the reason why is because he came from a background, a very, very wealthy shipping background. His family were shipping magnates, and he knew how to manage budgets. And they cut like crazy. Because what they were dealing with in the early 90s was all the wastage that was there from Trudeau and then Mulroney. So, but that Liberal Party is gone. Okay. The Liberal Party that you knew that they pretend to be, that is gone. So what's left? What's left is a transnational globalist agenda, which Carney calls this New World Order. This views nations like Canada, borders, and individual freedoms as obstacles. That's all stuff we have to get rid of. Okay, that's what when Carney says that there's been a rupture. Okay, he's not talking about something that happened in his pants. He's talking about maybe that's happening. I don't know. Ask him talking. But what he's talking about is, he says rupture, he means everything that we know, that we love about Canada, that binds us together, shared values, political representative democracy, loving your neighbor, supremacy of God, the rule of law. That stuff's all gone. Throw it away. We don't need that anymore. Okay? Canadian sovereignty is being dismantled piece by piece through supranational commitments. Okay? Unchecked bureaucracy, policies that prioritize international visions over citizens' needs. Let me give you an example. This just happened. Those of you in this community know all about the snowbirds, right? Snowbirds are a very important training program for our National Air Force. A lot of the guys who go into the snowbirds, they use those as training planes, and then they go on to become our best and brightest pilots. In fact, one of the men who just went to the moon recently started his career in one of those planes. Well, guess what? Our prime minister just shut down that program for 6 years. You know why? Because they borrowed money to give to Ukraine. where our former Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is there. Money laundering. You start to see the picture? Okay. So wealth is stripped by inflation. You all know about inflation if you've been to a grocery store recently. Regulation and restricted mobility. Remember COVID? Okay. Freedom erodes under the guise of safety. They promise, oh, you know, the world is ruptured. Be afraid. Be very afraid. We'll protect you. Well, how is this government protecting you? How is this government that spends more money on the Indigenous, who comprise of about 3% of our national population, they spend more money on the Indigenous than they do on national defense? Just drink that in for a second. What's the number one job of our federal government? What's their number one job? Do you know? To protect our borders. What else do we need them for? Seriously, what else do we need a national government for? All of our local government can do just about everything else. From policing to healthcare to even taxation. We don't need those guys in Ottawa. The only reason why we have them is to protect our borders. Well, they're not protecting our borders. They're opening our borders to all the people we need protection from. You get the picture? Okay, so this is Act 2. The evidence, I don't need to tell you, is in the outcomes. Declining living standards, cultural fragmentation, and a growing disconnect between the rulers and the rule. These people are supposed to be our servants, supposed to be our public servants, right? They're our servants. They see themselves as elected masters. Our Prime Minister spent over $200,000 on a meal during a flight, a transcontinental flight. Okay, this Prime Minister he set a record for having the most international trips in a year. He even beat Trudeau. You can believe that. Okay, Act 3. This is something called hackable animals without free will. This is important. So drawing from ideas I mentioned about Yuval Harari, these guys treat humans as hackable animals. What does that mean? They see us as biological machines lacking true consciousness or free will. Programmable, like a computer, through data, algorithms, and narrative control. Technology, surveillance, behavioral science become tools to manage the herd. Stories replace truth. Like hantavirus is going to get you. Okay. Algorithms shape our desires. We laugh at things like honor and tradition and virtue, and we're shocked by betrayal and chaos in our midst. As C.S. Lewis warned, he said, we make men without chests and we expect from them virtue and enterprise. This is the spiritual void at the heart of the project, the spiritual void, the material abundance or its promise exchanged for meaning, dignity, and autonomy. Okay, what's Act 4? What's the final act? The final reveal in this 4-act play is the elevation of a man-made digital god. I know, sounds crazy. This is real. These guys actually think that they are going to create a general intelligence AI that is going to run absolutely everything, that is going to know all, see all, and most of all, control all. They're doing it through those little things in your pockets. They're doing it when they take your picture at Walmart. They're doing it right now. Hello. So AI, centralized digital systems, and technocratic governance promise godlike mastery over life, longevity, happiness, control over nature. But they demand something that is very, very important. Total, but to Brussels or Ottawa boardrooms. Free will, forget it, obsolete. We as individuals, we dissolve it to data points. Sovereignty yields to global governance. This is Homo Deus. Human beings upgraded, in their view, upgraded into something post-human. See, when they say post-nation state, what they really mean is post-human state. Because a nation is just an expression of the individuals who inhabit it. Okay, what is a nation? A nation is a group of people with shared values connected to land. We can see how they're disconnecting us from our land, disconnecting us from each other. And I'm telling you, this is where they're going. And unfortunately, if they succeed, they're going to strip us of what makes us truly human. So where do we stand? Well, my friends, this is not inevitable. This is good news. It's a scary play. It's a horror show. Okay. History shows that aware, courageous people like Albertans can push back against tyranny dressed as progress. We've done this before. We have the hearts, we have the courage, but we've got to reclaim our resources from those who hoard and weaponize them. We've got to defend sovereignty. We've got to defend our borders and democratic accountability. That's the big one. We have to reject this idea that humans are mere hackable code. We have to affirm our God-given dignity, free will, and capacity for virtue. And we have to live up to that. And that's hard. We have to speak truth in our circles. We have to live not by lies. We have to build parallel structures of family, community, faith, and local resilience. We have to question their narratives. When Carney talks about New World Order, question that. What are you talking about, New World Order? I like the order we have now. In fact, I like the way it was before 2015 when you guys came along. And we have to demand evidence over just edict, right? But you know, folks, the most important part of it is our faith. Whether in God, reason, or human potential, this matters more than ever right now. And we have to ask the question, will we surrender to a digital God, a false idol, a new Babel, if you know your Old Testament? Or will we rediscover the spark that made us capable of greatness in the first place? That's a goal worth fighting for, isn't it? So the choice is ours, but the hour is late. We've got between now and October 19th, we've got this referendum. We've got a chance to say no to these people who want to destroy us, who see us as useless eaters. By the way, that term was penned by a man you might know from history named Adolf Hitler. It's in his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. He used that term, useless eaters. That same term is in Yuval Harari's book. So if you don't get how dangerous these people are, then you haven't been listening tonight, and I hope you have. So let's choose wisely with chests that are full and open. God bless Alberta. God bless you. Thank you. I can't believe I forgot to introduce the star of our show. Chris Scott, who's responsible for organizing all of this. Courageous man who I got to know during the quote unquote pandemic. And I'm honored to know him. Although as I've said before in these shows, he irritates me because he's the only guy who gets a standing ovation at these things. But you know, it's wrong to be envious. And so here's Chris Scott.
Green one? Yeah. Am I the, this is green. Still green. This is the green one. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Am I the only one that feels a little bit uneasy when a lawyer mentions that you're the responsible party? I mean, I've heard that before in court, and it generally doesn't go well for that person. Whatever. I'll take it this time. Well, thank you all for coming. Before I begin, I have a very important question, and I need you to be brutally honest. How many people are here who are on the fence or opposed to the idea of Alberta independence? Be brave. There's always one. Okay, that's So that's good. The reason I asked that, and if you are opposed or on the fence, that's okay. You don't. Oh, hey, now I got self. We don't have to. We're not trying to pick on you or anything. I just wanted to say thank you for coming, because that's the point of this Let's Talk Alberta initiative, is that we start talking about these things. We have a fairly significant and important question coming up in 160 days, correct?
Correct.
160-ish days. I mean, it might be held over a little bit, who knows, but it's going to be somewhere around there. In my opinion, this is the most important question that Albertans will be asked likely in our lifetime. There is no election, federal or provincial, no municipal election, no school board, no anything that's going to have as big a consequence as the question that you're going to be asked in October. And that terrifies me, not because of the question, but because I am acutely aware that the majority of Albertans don't understand the implications of the question or the details surrounding it. The majority of Albertans, up until a few years ago, probably didn't even know what a constituency association was. I didn't, let alone how Alberta became part of Confederation, what were the conditions. I didn't even know that we became a province because we were legislated by Ottawa. That was news to me. And I think that the majority of Albertans kind of are in those same shoes. They just don't know. Most people are quite confused about not just the question, but the situation around it. So if you get a group of people going into a question that's important, a question of that magnitude and that importance, and they're confused, the outcome is not going to probably be the best outcome. So Let's Talk Alberta wants to go to every single corner of Alberta 6 times. And we want to get as many people in rooms as we can to talk about these things, specifically to answer your questions. For those of you that might be on the fence about sovereignty, maybe you're emotionally attached to Canada, kind of like I am, by the way, to be honest. Maybe you have some things that you need answered. Maybe you have some concerns. Maybe you have people in your circle of friends or your family who feel like, a sovereign Alberta would be detrimental to them because of A, B, or C. Maybe some people in this room are concerned about your pensions. Maybe some people in this room are concerned about taxes or federal transfers, those types of things. These are all legitimate concerns. And they're all things that we need to talk about. But it's important that we talk about them and we get to the truth, we get to the facts. And then we decide what we want in October. If we don't do that, if we allow the majority of Alberta to continue to be walking around in this political stupor, not really understanding things, I fear we will have missed the greatest opportunity that we've ever had as, well, even as Canadians. And why do I say even as Canadians? I mean, we decided to be a country and became independent and sovereign and wrote a constitution and these things, and we self-govern, right? No. None of those things have ever happened in Canada. This was also news to me. And what a shock it was. Because I started going to school in the mid-'80s. I'm 46 years old. When did we start going to school? 6 years old, 5 years old, something like that? So I guess it would have been about 1984, 1985. 1984, I guess it would have been. That was 2 years after the Constitution was brought back to Canada from the UK. It was a very exciting time in politics. We got our Charter Rights and Freedoms. We had this new Constitution. We're the freest country in the world because the government told us what rights we have. See what I did there? And there was this idea, this feeling that the future was so bright because we'd always be free. And many people around the world believed that. Many people felt that. So much so that they would work their butts off in their home countries, sell everything they had, and go thousands of miles away to another land for freedom and opportunity and prosperity. That's what Canada was. It was the destination for people that wanted to make something of themselves and be free. How sad is it that in the last few years, we've actually seen people fleeing this country because they don't feel like the freedoms are there anymore. So we believed these things to be true. We thought that when Pierre-Elliott Trudeau brought the Constitution back, that this was our big deal. But since then, I've learned that even the inception of Canada wasn't anything to do with you, the people, or me, or I mean, it's 150 years ago. But the people occupying the land, working hard, breaking land and building things, homesteading, surviving winters, or not even. We believed that it was this grassroots, ambitious endeavor to create a free country. Then I find out that not only did we not get together in rooms like this and talk about how we wanted to be governed and what our country was going to look like, or what was going to look like, but our leaders of the day actually went to another nation and they sat with their elite, with the crown, and they drafted a piece of legislation called the British North America Act and imposed it over the Dominion of Canada and told the people there, this is how you're going to be governed. Well, that's not freedom, sovereignty, or independence. That's self-governance, sure. But still under a king, still under a governor general, still under a colonial imperialistic empire that rewarded those that kept peace, order, and good governance. And we lived like this for years, not really understanding what it meant to sovereign individuals with rights granted by God, with big G, not by government. We didn't get it. Even in 1982, when the charter was enshrined in the Constitution, we didn't quite grasp, well, some did, but the majority didn't grasp what it means when the government enumerates your rights and freedoms and tells you these are the ones you have. That's all fine and dandy, but my question is, if you're telling me that those are my rights and freedoms, what about the ones you didn't write down? What about property rights? You didn't put that on there, Pierre. What about freedom of speech? You didn't put that on there. You put thought, religion, and expression. So we live under a system that implies that the government grants us what we have. And if you paid attention to what Leighton just said, it makes perfect sense. The ultimate measure of control is when somebody who you don't influence tells you what you may or may not do, and there's nothing you can do about it. Isn't it strange? Isn't it strange how we missed all of that? From 1867 all the way forward to 2026, we missed it. And we actually had some cues from history. We had some cues from the United States War of Independence, right? They fought for 6 years, a bloody war against the King of England, lost tens of thousands of lives in a time, by the way, where there's no antibiotics, no anesthetics, no nothing. It was just horrible, the things that happened. And they fought, they triumphed over their oppressors, and the oppression was a 2% tax, and they didn't feel represented by that government. That's what started this whole thing. And then they decided that they were going to declare their independence and write a constitution that they wrote, the people write. So the people did that. They wrote a document that it told those people who wished to govern, this is how you may govern. This is what we will allow you to do. These are our rights, and not limited to. We're going to keep making amendments after this and make sure that the government knows what our rights are clearly. And it's going to put boundaries on government. So much so that we're going to make sure that our foundational document, our Constitution, grants us the right to a militia, not just so we can go and build a dam if we need to, but to protect against government tyranny. Why was the Second Amendment so important? because the founding fathers realized that government, if left unchecked, if there's no balance between the strength of government and the strength and will of the people, the government will always tyrannize the people. And you might not like this reality, but that's why the Second Amendment is there. That's why there's also a right to a well-regulated militia, specifically to protect against government tyranny. That's what happened when people decided to be sovereign, to affirm their sovereignty and their right to demand consent from those who wish to govern them, to grant them that governance. Canada never did that. We didn't. And I'll debate anyone says that we did. You go back to the British North America Act, and that does not read like a constitution that the people wrote. That reads like an instruction manual that another sovereign nation imposed on a colony to maintain control, to continue harvesting resources and building wealth while keeping control. Canada has always been about control. That's why the Canada you see today doesn't look like the Canada that was before 82, that Dr. Michael Wagner talks about all the time. Because these mechanisms of control have accelerated and evolved and morphed into things that can actually put you in jail or bankrupt you for the crime of calling a biological female a female, or of calling a biological male a male. The crime of hurting somebody's feelings. The crime of offending someone. I've said for years, I've watched this my whole adult life. Europe and the UK, they're about 5 years ahead of Canada, 4 to 5 years ahead of Canada with their ridiculous, deluded policy, right? Like 5 years ago, we were watching people in Europe paying, $2 a liter for gas and be like, oh, thank goodness we don't live in Europe. I mean, those guys, they're crazy. They're literally taxing cow farts. What are we doing here? They're locking people up for their Facebook posts in the UK. They're controlling people's speech and thought. When I was in London, I made a point to go and I stood at the exact spot where a woman was arrested for being in public and praying in her head. She offended other people. And they reported her to the police and they arrested. They said, what are you doing? Well, I'm just standing there. Well, are you praying? Well, yeah, but silently in my head, it's offensive. You're under arrest. How far do we have to allow these things to go before we do something about it? How long do we have to live under a structure that never was designed for you and was always designed to maintain those mechanisms of control? How long? Are we going to do something about it when we surpass the 50% threshold of tax? Oh, wait, we did that already. We worked until July to pay the government. And then we start earning money for ourselves and our families. Are we going to let it get to the point where we can no longer engage in the industries that fuel and feed the nation because somewhere it hailed or there was a wildfire? Oh, wait, we're already doing that. Are we going to continue down this path until the government tells our farmers that they suggest, remember the wheat board was a suggestion too, they suggest that you put 30% of your land back to wilderness because climate change and biodiversity. Oh, wait, they're doing that right now in Holland. 4 years ago, I hopped on a plane with about 10 days notice, and I flew to Amsterdam without knowing anybody there, without knowing where I was going to stay, and not a lot of money, because I watched a Facebook video of Dutch farmers protesting policies that were doing that. They were actually taking their farms from them. They're imposing these policies, environmental lunacy policies, and it was forcing farmers off their land. And the goal, as the Dutch government said, was, no, we want to get rid of farming. There's too many farmers. There's too many farms. It's causing climate catastrophes. And so they pushed them off their farms. 3,000 when I was there 4 years ago. So I went there because I wanted to stand with and talk to and get to know the Dutch farmers that were protesting these things. Because 2 years before, I watched Dutch farmers flying Canadian flags with their tractors and trucks supporting the Canadian truckers when we were in Ottawa. So I wanted to go there and I wanted to stand with them as well. And the things that I heard blew my mind, but they're here now. That was 2 years ago. Mechanisms of control that we never would have believed 20 years ago. Would you have thought in your wildest dreams that not only would we allow men dressed as women to have our children sit on their laps while they're reading them books that they have no business reading, but if you said something about it or protested it, you'd go to jail? You could never have convinced me that that was going to happen. And now I think this is on the topic of Alberta independence is so scary because we don't know what it's going to be like. Well, I know it's not going to be better. If we don't do anything, the status quo, I don't think things are getting better. I know they're getting worse. I know they're on a downward trajectory. I can't imagine if we just let this happen and we look back 20 years from now, what will we be saying? 20 years ago, could you have imagined that this was going to happen? The fear of the unknown for me is so much less than the fear of what I know to be true, what is demonstrable in policy, in society, in law. What we see happening around us is infinitely more troubling than the opportunity of Albertans being able to decide what their future looks like. That's what this is really about. This is not about paying less taxes, although that will be nice. This is not about, finally having grown-ups that are negotiating our trade deals, but that would be nice. This is not about getting another pipeline or 5 and shipping oil east and west and more south, although that would be nice. This is about, for the first time in Canadian history, not just Alberta's history, the first time in Canadian history that the people have the opportunity to be the ones that chart their course, the ones that influence their future. Because we don't do that right now. Alberta has this incredible opportunity that other nations, other peoples have fought and died for. They've literally fought wars that lasted hundreds of years to get the opportunity to do what we're going to be asked on the ballot in October. And because of that, it's not lost on me the burden that each one of us carries to bring this conversation to the rest of the people in Alberta. Every one of them. We have a duty, an obligation, a moral obligation to those who actually fought for our opportunities at freedom. We have a moral obligation in their memory to pursue freedom and independence and sovereignty. And the only way we can do that is by having conversations. That's why Let's Talk Alberta exists. Because we need to have these conversations. We need to blanket this entire Alberta in a sea of facts and information that support the inevitable conclusion that Alberta independence is not only necessary, but it is inevitable. We need to train leaders, ambassadors for independence, disciples for sovereignty to go out into Alberta and spread this message one-on-one, face-to-face. There's half the chairs in this room are empty. That's okay, because this isn't about filling rooms like this, although it would be nice. This is about encouraging you folks to go back out into your community, your circles of trust, those who you have a relationship with, and have these conversations. When they say, oh, Alberta independence, that will never happen, your response should be, oh, let's talk about that. And listen to what they're saying. When people have these unhinged emotional outbursts about it, you know the ones I'm talking about, they grit their teeth and they just clench right up like that. Our job is not to be like, I need an old priest, a young priest, some water, and a crucifix, please. Our job is to listen to them and dig down and drill down into that emotional outburst and find where it's coming from. Oftentimes, you'll find something like that person relies on an entitlement from the federal government, and they see independence or sovereignty as a threat to their life because they will no longer receive the money they get from the federal government. Well, now we can talk about that. But you got to talk about it. So I've been talking too long, which is pretty usual. Thank you for putting up with me. We're going to go into a Q&A in about 10 minutes. And I say 10 minutes because we're also long-winded. I know your legs are probably asleep. You need to get up and walk around, maybe chat a little bit. You know, perhaps maybe some people have noticed that there's a table over there with all sorts of great Alberta stuff that's slightly overpriced, but is great for conversation starters. I see some people wearing them. Thank you very much. You may have noticed that my friend Leighton and his family, they've got some cool stuff over there and some books that he's written. When you buy a book from someone like Leighton, you're buying something more valuable than just a book. That's hundreds of hours and years, actually, of accrued wisdom put down in a book so that you can digest these thoughts easily and use them in your day-to-day lives. That's pretty valuable. That goes with any of our presenters that bring these things. When you go buy one of those shirts from Brad and Bahra, you're not just getting a t-shirt, you're getting a message. You're getting a conversation starter. What do I see that one from here? Freedom from tyranny, FAFO. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure it would be a conversation starter. So please take 10 minutes, grab a drink and a t-shirt and a book, and we'll come back, reconvene for a Q&A. And the one thing I'm going to ask you, no, I'll ask you more things later, but one thing I would like to ask you is that when you're thinking about questions to ask, I want you to ask the questions that you think are the toughest. I want you to try and convince me and Leighton and Shane that Alberta shouldn't be sovereign. Please do. If you have things that your neighbors have said, oh, we can't pursue independence because of this, I want to hear it. I want you to tell me why we can't do this. And then I'll talk to you about it. I'll talk with you about it. Thank you very much.
So we're going into intermission mode, guys. The washrooms are on that side over there.
About it, and then I'm gonna go for another.
Oh, okay. Okay, I like to be stumped. I wonder if I should leave this on for the Q&A. Should I? 10 minutes is a long time. You know, I'm not going tonight. You know what, folks? I'll do a podcast maybe tomorrow evening, and we'll talk about the results of the Q&A. But I'm not going to make you sit there and wait. So thank you very much for watching. And oh, hold on a second. How do I do this? No. This one, just 1 second. There we are. Yeah, we're going to wrap it up here. I'm not going to keep the live stream going for the Q&A. I think Max over at freedomcalendar.net, he's going to live stream the Q&A, but I'm going to summarize it and bring all the questions, concerns, and statements even to a podcast that I'll do tomorrow night. So you can catch me there on YouTube, X, or Facebook, and the links are all on my pages. Thanks for watching. See you later.